Today I was watching Hawaii Five-0, a show from the archives, when I saw something different and it spoke to me concerning all of our lives. I want to share that with you just a little bit. The program started with a celebration of honor being given at the site of the Pearl Harbor bombing, which occurred on December 7th, 1941. Soldiers, sailors, and military ranking officers were giving their respects to the fallen and remaining heroes of that day. As the celebration came to a close, people were walking away. Steve McGarrett, the boss, star of the show, saw a man of Japanese descent pull a gun out of his pocket and aim at another man who was in a wheelchair, who was wearing an old U.S. military uniform and who was now seated in this wheelchair. Of course, as the script would have it, McGarrett was able to apprehend the man of Japanese descent. He was detained and questioned about his plans for that day. There is a spiritual point to this, just hang in there with me, okay? He said that the Japanese man said that he intended on killing this man who was in the wheelchair because this man had murdered his father in 1943. This was 2013 when this was filmed. This man had allegedly murdered his father in 1943 while he and his family were detained in a concentration-style camp in Hawaii. As the story unfolded, it was learned that this man, who was only 10 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese, was actually an American citizen born and raised in the United States. His family had immigrated to America decades before 1941. His father was a teacher, and his mother and entire family were well honored, respected, and loved by those who knew them, as they were very active in their community. But because of their Japanese descent, their family, along with many other families of Japanese descent, were sent to this camp called Honouliuli. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. While at this camp in May of 1943, this young man, whose name, he said his name was David, was playing ball with his dad under the watchtower, the guard tower, when his dad saw something happening in their tent and they went to check it out. He went to check it out, the dad did. While his dad was in the tent, the dad was shot and killed, and David ran back to his tent to see an American military police officer in uniform, whom he believed to be the killer of his father, and the man in the wheelchair, stooping down over his now deceased father. Naturally, he believed that this soldier had just killed his dad based on the visible circumstances he was looking at. As the story unfolded, they came to an awareness that David's father had actually been killed on that day, but the perpetrator of the murder was not the soldier that was in uniform, but this soldier in uniform had actually responded there when he heard the gunshot ring out, as he was only stationed less than 10 yards away from the tent where David's dad had been killed. As the script went on and would present it, they were able to locate the actual killer, who was now dead himself, but who had left to his grandson an artifact, an old samurai sword, that he had stolen from David's father's tent when he had killed him. The artifact, like I said, was an old samurai sword that had been inscribed with family information of David's family many years before this. To the Japanese, this familial sword was like a badge of honor, and not having it was a disgrace to the remaining family members. In the end of the show, again as was scripted, the sword was retrieved and returned to its rightful owner, named David, who was the sole remaining heir of his family, as even his family members of his own personal family had been killed in wars defending the United States. Remember, this man's of Japanese descent, but he's an American. What came to me during this show and after, while pondering it in my heart, was that even though this show was entirely scripted for the best outcome, many of our lives have also been scripted toward a specific outcome as well. While the outcome for us may be far less than what God would really script out for us, our lives have been scripted by many things in our lives. There's a lot of things that try to dictate to you how your life is going to be. Right? Looking at this young man David, whose father was killed by another, David had scripted his life toward revenge. Bear with me. I'm headed somewhere. David, this young man of 10 years old when his dad was killed, had scripted his life toward revenge against someone that he believed to have been the perpetrator of his father's death, when in fact that man wasn't the killer at all. He had a script in his life based on a lie. That lie came from a belief system based on what he saw. Seeing is not always believing. Okay? Everything in David's life became consumed by the sole script of revenge and recompense, all while the target of his animosity was the wrong one indeed. Our lives have been scripted by our familial upbringing, whether it's good or bad, our schooling or lack thereof. Our lives have been scripted by our society, whether or not it was good or bad. And it's been scripted by our religious influences, again, whether good or bad. The final and most important thing that has scripted our lives has been our individual choices. Again, whether they were good or whether they were bad, they have written down our life's path for us. And we have at times mindlessly followed them because we have seen ourselves as merely actors on the stage of life, acting out of this script that has been prepared for us. Because we were taught certain religious principles as youth, even though many times we didn't adhere to them as our instructors would have liked for us to. We were so strongly influenced by this scripting that we rarely, if ever, veered from it. If you don't think that religious upbringing is strong, you're kidding yourself. Because how you were raised in your early days of your life religiously affects you for a long period of time and can be an adverse effect on you, just like David's thinking was in that particular instance, because his life became scripted by something that he thought was true, and then he found out later on, 70 years later, he found out it was not true.